Let me tell you something that still makes my hands shake when I think about it. I have replayed that afternoon in my head 1,000 times, and every single time, I feel the same cold dread creeping up my spine, the same white-hot fury rising in my chest. What I found inside that house, inside my own son's house, was something I never, not in 67 years of living, could have prepared myself for. And the worst part, it had been right there, hidden above my head, for months, maybe longer. I just didn't know it yet. My name is Eleanor. I am a retired school teacher, a widow of 11 years, a woman who prides herself on knowing her family. I raised my son Marcus with my own 2 hands after his father passed. I ironed his school shirts. I sat with him through fevers. I drove him to college with a car full of boxers and a heart full of hope. I thought I knew him. I thought I knew everything about him. That is the most painful kind of wrong there is. The kind where love made you blind. Marcus and his wife, Diane, had been planning their anniversary trip to Portugal for nearly a year. 10 days in Lisbon, then a few days along the Algarve coast. They deserved it. Truly, they both worked hard. Diane was a project manager at a logistics firm. Marcus ran his own small construction company. They were busy people, always moving, always exhausted. When they finally booked the trip, I was genuinely happy for them. I offered to check on their house while they were gone, water the plants, collect the mail, make sure everything was in order. Their house is about 20 minutes from mine, a lovely 2-story colonial on Briarwood Lane, the kind of street with oak trees that arch over the road like a cathedral. Marcus bought it 6 years ago, right after he and Diane got married. I had helped them pick out the kitchen curtains. I had celebrated Christmases in that living room. I knew every corner of that house, or so I thought. It was on the 4th day of their trip that I decided to arrange a cleaning service as a surprise. I wanted the house to be spotless when they returned. Fresh sheets, scrubbed floors, polished counters, a welcome home gift. The kind mothers give when words feel too small. I called a local agency and booked a woman named Rosa for a half-day deep clean. Rosa was a professional, recommended by my neighbor Judith, who swore by her. I dropped off the spare key the morning of and told Rosa to call me if she needed anything. I went home. I made myself a pot of chamomile tea. I sat down with the crossword puzzle and told myself I had done something kind. Exactly 58 minutes later, my phone rang. I still remember the sound of Rosa's voice. It wasn't the voice of someone who had broken a vase or couldn't find the mug. It was tight and strange and hushed, like she was afraid of being heard. She said, "Ma'am, I'm sorry to bother you. I don't want to alarm you, but there is someone crying upstairs. In the attic, I think. And it is not the television. The television is off." I checked. She paused. Then she whispered, "Ma'am, I think there is someone in this house." My tea went cold. My crossword puzzle fell to the floor. I was in my car in less than 3 minutes. The drive to Briarwood Lane felt like the longest of my life. My mind was doing terrible things to me, conjuring images I didn't want: a burglar, an intruder, someone dangerous, crouching in the dark above Rosa's head while she scrubbed the kitchen floor unknowing. I called Marcus's cell on the way. It rang out. Portugal was an hour ahead, but it was still mid-afternoon there. I tried Diane. Nothing. I thought about calling the police, and I almost did, but something stopped me. A feeling I could not explain yet, something quieter than fear, something that felt almost like knowing. When I pulled into the driveway, Rosa was standing on the front porch with her arms wrapped around herself. She looked pale. She said the crying had stopped about 10 minutes ago, but that before it stopped, it had sounded, and she searched for the word, small, like something small and frightened and trying not to be heard. I went inside. I stood in the hallway of my son's house, and I listened, and then I heard it, a soft, hitching sound from above the ceiling. Not a ghost, not a television, not the house settling, a child. It was the sound of a child who had been crying for a long time and had finally worn themselves down to something barely audible, the kind of crying that comes after you've given up on anyone coming. I found the attic door at the end of the upstairs hallway, half hidden behind a rack of coats. I pulled down the fold-out ladder with trembling hands. I climbed, and what I found at the top of those stairs cracked. Something open inside me that I am not sure has ever fully healed. If you are watching this right now and you have ever been blindsided by someone you trusted completely, someone you would have defended to your last breath, then you already know the feeling I am about to describe. That moment where love and fury arrive at exactly the same time, and you don't know which one is louder. Stay with me, because this story is just beginning. And if this is your first time on this channel, Please subscribe and hit that notification bell. Stories like this one, raw and real and told straight from the heart, come out every single week. Also, I want to ask you something before we go further. Where are you watching this from right now? Drop your city, your country, wherever you are in the world, right there in the comments below. It always moves me to see how far these stories travel. The attic was dim. A single small window at the far end let in a pale rectangle of afternoon light, and dust moved slowly through it like snow that had forgotten how to fall. There were boxes up there, the usual kind, holiday decorations, old tax files, luggage Marcus and Diane rarely used, a rolled-up rug, a broken floor lamp propped against the wall, the kind of accumulated life that families push out of sight and forget about. But in the far corner, half hidden behind a tower of cardboard boxes and a folded camping mattress, there was a child. She was small. I would later learn she was 9 years old. But in that moment, curled into herself the way she was, she looked younger. She had her knees pulled up to her chest and her face buried against them, and she was wearing a pink sweatshirt with a faded unicorn on the front. Her hair was tangled, her socks didn't match. One of them had a small hole at the toe. These are the details you notice when your brain is trying to make sense of something that refuses to make sense. You grab onto the small things because the large thing is too enormous to hold all at once. I said, very softly, "Sweetheart." She flinched so hard she knocked one of the boxers sideways. Her head came up and her eyes found mine, and what I saw in those eyes nearly broke me in two. It was not the startled fear of a child caught doing something naughty. It was the deep, exhausted terror of someone who had learned that being found was not always a safe thing. I sat down on the attic floor right then and there. I didn't move toward her. I didn't reach out my hands. I just sat down, slowly, the way you might sit near a bird with a broken wing, and I said, "It's all right. I'm not going to hurt you. My name is Eleanor. What's yours?" She stared at me for a long time. Her chin was trembling. Then, in a voice so quiet I had to lean forward to catch it, she said, "Lily. Double quotes, Lily. I want you to hold that name for a moment. Lily, 9 years old. Pink sweatshirt, mismatched socks, hidden in the attic of my son's house while he and his wife were sipping wine in Portugal." I asked her, as gently as I could manage, how long she had been up there. She thought about it with the solemn concentration of a child doing difficult arithmetic. "Since Tuesday," she said. It was Friday. 3 days. She had been in that attic, alone, for 3 days. I looked around more carefully then. Behind the camping mattress there was a plastic storage bin, and the lid was ajar. I could see inside it a water bottle, nearly empty, a sleeve of crackers, almost finished, a small flashlight, a picture book, a stuffed rabbit with one eye missing that looked like it had been loved nearly 2 pieces. Someone had prepared that space. Someone had put those things there deliberately. My blood, which had been running cold since Rosa's phone call, began slowly, steadily to heat. I asked Lily if she knew Marcus and Diane. She nodded carefully, like the question required caution. I asked if they had told her to stay up here. She looked down at her mismatched socks and said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. I told her I was going to help her down the ladder, and that we were going to go downstairs, and that I was going to get her something proper to eat. She hesitated for a long moment, that rabbit clutched against her chest, and then she stood up. She was so small, standing up. I cannot explain to you how small she looked, or how loud the silence of that attic felt around her. I helped her down the ladder. Rosa was standing at the bottom of the stairs, and when she saw Lily her hand went to her mouth. I shook my head slightly at Rosa, a signal that said not now, not in front of her, and Rosa understood. She was already moving toward the kitchen. By the time Lily and I reached the bottom of the stairs, Rosa had found bread and butter, and a banana, and a glass of milk, and she set them on the kitchen table without a word, quiet and kind in the way that certain people simply are. Lily ate with the focused urgency of a child who had been pretending not to be hungry for too long. I sat across from her and I watched her eat, and I kept my face very still, because inside me something was building that I did not want her to see. A pressure behind my eyes, a tightness in my jaw, questions multiplying so fast they were tripping over each other. Who was this child? Where were her parents? How had she come to be hidden in my son's attic, with a bin full of crackers and a one-eyed rabbit? And what exactly did Marcus and Diane know about her being there? I tried Marcus again. Voicemail. I tried Diane. Voicemail. I sent Marcus a text that said, simply, "Call me immediately. It is urgent." And then I sent a second one that said, "There is a child in your attic." Her name is Lily. Call me now." My phone stayed silent. I looked at Lily, who had finished the bread and was starting on the banana, and I thought about what a 9-year-old child must have felt, alone in the dark for 3 days, listening to the sounds of an empty house and waiting. Waiting for what? For someone to come back, for someone to remember she was there. The more I sat with the facts of it, the more that pressure behind my eyes became something else entirely. It became fury. Quiet. Certain, bone-deep fury. And underneath the fury, because I am a mother, and mothers are built in layers. Something else, something that frightened me more than the anger did, the beginning of a terrible suspicion about what kind of secret my son had been keeping, and how long he had been keeping it, and what it might mean for everyone sitting in that kitchen. There is a particular kind of silence that falls over a house when something has gone deeply wrong inside it. It is not the comfortable silence of an empty afternoon, or the peaceful quiet of a sleeping household. It is heavier than that. It has weight and texture. It presses against the walls. It sits in the corners. That afternoon, in Marcus and Diane's kitchen, with Lily finishing her banana and Rosa quietly wiping down the counter she had already wiped 3 times, that silence was everywhere. I watched Lily and I thought about what I knew, which was very little, and what I suspected, which was growing by the minute into something I could barely contain. I decided to ask her one more question. Just one, carefully. "The way you test ice before you put your full weight on it," I said. "Lily, sweetheart, does anyone know you are here? Someone who is supposed to be looking after you?" She looked up at me. Those eyes, again. That careful, calculating look that no 9-year-old should have to wear so naturally. Then she said, "Aunt Diane said not to open the attic door for anyone. She said if I stayed quiet, everything would be okay." She paused. Then she added, very quietly, as though it were a confession, "But I got scared at night, Aunt Diane." I set my hands flat on the table. I pressed them down firmly because they had begun to tremble, and I did not want Lily to see that Aunt Diane. So she knew Diane, not as a stranger, not as some distant acquaintance, as family, as an aunt, or someone she called aunt, which in the geography of a child's world amounts to the same thing. Someone trusted, someone safe, someone who had put a 9-year-old child in an attic with a sleeve of crackers and a flashlight, and told her to stay quiet, and called that keeping her okay. I excused myself from the kitchen. I walked to the living room, and I stood in front of the fireplace, the one I had helped Marcus choose the mantle for, and I pressed my fingers against my lips, and I breathed, in through the nose, out through the mouth, the way I used to tell my students to breathe when something felt too large for them. Then I called my daughter-in-law's sister. Her name was Pamela, and she was the only member of Diane's family whose number I had saved. We were not close, Pamela and I, but we were cordial. Holiday greeting cordial. We had sat next to each other at Marcus and Diane's wedding and found enough common ground to get through the reception. I had her number because of a logistical mix-up at Thanksgiving 3 years ago that had required us to coordinate, and I had never deleted it. She picked up on the 3rd ring. I kept my voice level. I said, "Pamela, I apologize for calling out of nowhere. I am at Marcus and Diane's house, and there is a child here named Lily who says she knows Diane. I was hoping you might be able to help me understand the situation." The silence on Pamela's end lasted just a beat too long, the kind of pause that tells you everything before a single word is spoken. Then she said, carefully, "Eleanor, oh, you found her. Oh, you found her." Not, "What child?" Not, "I'm sorry, I don't know what you mean." Not any of the responses an innocent person gives when confronted with something unexpected. Instead, 3 words that confirmed, in an instant, that this was not an accident. This was not a miscommunication. This was something that multiple adults had known about and chosen, deliberately and collectively, to keep from me. I gripped the phone tighter. I said, "Yes, I found her. Now I need you to tell me who she is." Another pause. Then Pamela exhaled, long and slow, the breath of someone setting down a weight they have been carrying too long, and she told me. Lily was Diane's niece, her brother's child. Diane's brother, a man named Curtis, had been struggling for several years with addiction. His wife, Lily's mother, had left when Lily was 6, and had not been reliably present since. Curtis had been in and out of rehabilitation programs. He was currently in a residential treatment facility for states away, where he had been for the past 6 weeks. He was doing better, Pamela said. He was really trying this time, but Lily had needed somewhere to go, and Diane had taken her in, quietly, without telling the school system, without involving social services, without telling her mother, without as far as I could determine, telling anyone official at all. Just taken her in, quietly, kept her in the house, homeschooling her loosely, managing the situation privately the way people sometimes try to manage things that have grown far beyond private management. And then the anniversary trip had come, the trip that had been planned for nearly a year, and Diane had apparently decided, and this is the part where the fury I had been carefully banking roared back to full flame, that the solution was to leave 9-year-old Lily in the attic for 10 days with a bin of supplies and instructions to stay quiet. I stood in that living room for a long time after I hung up with Pamela. I stood there and I looked at the photographs on the mantel. Marcus at his college graduation, Marcus and Diane on their wedding day, laughing at something off camera, both of them bright-eyed and full of promise. A photograph of the three of us, Marcus, me, and his late father, taken at a beach somewhere when Marcus was about 7 years old. 7. About Lily's age when her mother left, about the age when a child begins to understand that the world is not always arranged in their favor. I thought about Lily upstairs in that attic in the dark. I thought about her flashlight and her crackers and her one-eyed rabbit. I thought about 3 nights alone in a strange, dark space, listening to an empty house, waiting for adults to come back and remember her. And I thought about my son, my Marcus, who had known, who had gone to Portugal knowing, who had let this happen. Because here is the thing I had not yet said out loud. The thing I was still pressing flat beneath my palms. Marcus had known. He had to have known. You do not have a child living in your house for 6 weeks without knowing. You do not pack your bags and fly to Portugal without knowing. He had known, and he had gone anyway, and he had not called me, and he had not made any arrangement. Beyond a bin of crackers and a flashlight and a little girl's terrified obedience, I walked back into the kitchen. Lily had finished eating. She was sitting very still, the rabbit in her lap, watching the door with those careful eyes. When she saw me come back in, something in her small shoulders relaxed almost imperceptibly, just a fraction, just enough for me to notice. I sat down across from her again. I said, Lily, you are going to come and stay with me for a little while. Is that all right? She thought about it seriously, the way children do when they have learned that agreeing too quickly sometimes leads somewhere bad. Then she looked at me, and something shifted in her expression. Some small, cautious light. Okay, she said. I nodded. I helped her gather her things from the attic, the rabbit, the picture book, the flashlight she had clearly relied on through 3 dark nights. I packed a bag with some clothes I found in the small spare bedroom, where I could now see, looking properly, that a child had clearly been living. The evidence was everywhere once you knew to look for it. Drawings on the desk, a small pair of sneakers by the closet door, a library book on the nightstand about a girl who discovers she can talk to horses. Rosa helped me carry everything to the car. At the front door she squeezed my hand and said nothing, which was exactly right. I buckled Lily into the back seat and I pulled out of my son's driveway and I drove toward home. My phone buzzed. On the passenger seat, Marcus, calling back at last. I let it ring 3 times before I answered. Not because I was playing games, not because I wanted to punish him with silence, but because I needed those 3 rings to collect myself, to gather everything I was feeling, the fury, the grief, the disbelief, the love that was still stubbornly, inconveniently present underneath all of it, and compress it into something I could speak through without breaking. I picked up on the 4th ring. Mom. His voice was cautious. He had seen my texts. He knew. The single syllable of that word told me everything about what he was bracing for. Mom, listen, I can explain Marcus, I said. Just his name, quietly, the way I used to say it when he was a boy and had done something that genuinely disappointed me. Not the sharp reprimand voice, not the raised volume, but the low, steady tone that he had always told me, years later, was far more frightening than any shouting could have been. I have Lily in the car with me. She is safe. We are going to my house. When you land back in this country, you and I are going to have a conversation. Until then, I do not want to hear explanations. I want you to sit with what you did. A long silence. Then, very quietly, is she okay? I looked in the rearview mirror. Lily had the rabbit pressed to her cheek and was watching the trees go past the window with an expression that was not happiness exactly, but was something adjacent to it, something that looked like the first tentative exhale after a very long time of holding your breath. She is okay, I said. No thanks to the decisions that were made. I heard him swallow. Mom, it was complicated. The situation with Curtis, the timing, the trip, We didn't know what else to do, Marcus. That tone again. Not now. I hung up. The rest of the drive home was quiet. At one point Lily asked me if I had a dog. I told her I had a cat named Gerald, who was very old and very opinionated and would probably ignore her completely for the first 2 days and then never leave her side for the rest of her visit. She almost smiled. It was a small thing that almost smiled, but I held on to it. Back at my house, I made up the guest room with the yellow quilt that had been my mother's. I found a spare toothbrush still in its packaging under the bathroom sink. I made grilled cheese sandwiches for dinner because something told me Lily was a grilled cheese child, and I was right. She ate 2 of them. Gerald, who I had described accurately, sat in the doorway of the kitchen and stared at her with the magnificent indifference of a cat who has decided not to commit to anything yet. After dinner, I ran a bath and found some of my granddaughter's old pajamas from the drawer where I keep such things. I have 2 grandchildren from my daughter who live across the country, and they visit in summers, and I have learned to keep certain things on hand. The pajamas were soft and printed with small yellow stars, and they fit Lily well enough. I tucked her into the yellow quilt and I sat on the edge of the bed, and I read to her from the horse book I had packed from Marcus's spare room, the one about the girl who discovers she can talk to horses. I read until her breathing slowed and deepened, and the rabbit was tucked under her chin, and her eyes had stopped fighting to stay. Open eyes sat there in the quiet of the guest room for a long moment after she fell asleep, just looking at her, this child who had been hidden, this child who had eaten crackers alone in the dark and been afraid at night and held herself together with the fierce, fragile resilience that children somehow manufacture when adults fail them. She looked younger, asleep. They always do. I turned off the lamp and walked to the living room and sat down in the armchair by the window, the one I always sit in, the one that still somehow smells faintly of my husband's pipe tobacco, even after 11 years. And I allowed myself, finally, to feel the full weight of the day. It was heavy. I will not pretend otherwise, because here is what I want you to understand. Those of you watching this right now, those of you who have children or grandchildren or siblings or anyone you love, with the specific helpless ferocity that family produces, it is entirely possible to be furious at someone and heartbroken for them at the same time. It is entirely possible to feel both things with equal force and have neither one canceled the other out. I was furious at Marcus, genuinely, deeply furious, not for taking Lily in that part, if anything, made me proud of Diane in a complicated way, the instinct to protect her brother's child, to keep her close and safe when her own parents could not manage it. I understood that impulse. I respected it, even what I could not accept, what I could not fold into any version of my son that I wanted to hold on to, was the leaving, the going to Portugal, the 10 days of absence, and the bin of crackers, and the instructions to a 9-year-old to stay quiet and stay hidden, as though she were something to be managed, rather than someone to be loved. That was the part that burned. And yet, I also knew my son. I knew the way he had always handled things that overwhelmed him, by convincing himself they were more manageable than they were, by pushing forward, by compartmentalizing with the focused determination of a man who had learned young that falling apart was not an option. I had taught him that, partly. In the years after his father died, I had held myself together so firmly, so visibly, that perhaps I had accidentally taught him that feelings were things you packed away in attic boxes and dealt with later. Perhaps the apple, as they say, had not fallen as far from the tree as I had always assumed. That thought did not make me less angry, but it made the anger more complicated, and complicated anger is harder to sustain than clean anger, which is perhaps why, by the time Marcus and Diane's flight landed 2 days later and they appeared at my front door, I had moved through the worst of the furnace heat and arrived somewhere cooler and more deliberate. They looked terrible, both of them. Diane had been crying. I could tell. Marcus had the hollow, sleepless look of a man who has spent 48 hours sitting with himself and not enjoying the company. They stood on my porch like children sent to the principal's office, and in a way, I suppose, that is exactly what they were. I let them in. I made coffee. Lily was in the backyard with Gerald, who had abandoned his policy of magnificent indifference sometime during day 2, and was now following her around the garden like a small, self-important shadow. We sat at the kitchen table, the 3 of us, and Marcus talked. He told me everything, How Curtis had called from the treatment facility 6 weeks ago in crisis. How Lily had been staying with a neighbor whose own situation had become unstable. How Diane had driven 8 hours in a single day to bring Lily home because the alternative was a call to Child Protective Services and a placement with strangers and a disruption that Curtis, fragile and fighting for his sobriety, might not have survived intact. How they had meant to tell me. How they had kept saying they would tell me next week, after things settled, after Curtis improved, after they figured out a plan. How the trip had been paid for, how they had told themselves 10 days was manageable. How they had left Lily with enough supplies and enough instructions and enough reassurances that they had almost convinced themselves it was okay. Almost. Diane was crying openly by the time Marcus finished. She said, "I know it wasn't okay. I knew it the whole time. I didn't know how to fix it and keep everything else from falling apart at the same time." I looked at her for a long moment. Then I looked at my son. Then I said the thing I had spent 2 days preparing, the thing I had turned over and examined from every angle until I was sure it was true and complete, and said everything that needed saying. I said, "What you did was wrong. Leaving her was wrong. Hiding her was wrong. She is a child and she deserved better, and you both know it. That is not something I am willing to soften for you." I paused. "But she is here now. She is safe, and we are going to do this properly together. Openly, with no more hiding and no more pretending things are manageable when they are not. Curtis is going to get better, and when he does, Lily is going to go home to a father who knows that his daughter was looked after properly while he couldn't be there. That is what we are going to give her. Are we understood?" Marcus nodded. Diane wiped her eyes and nodded. Outside the window, Lily was laughing at something Gerald had done, a real laugh, full and unguarded, the kind children produce when they have temporarily forgotten to be careful. It floated in through the glass like something returned from a great distance. I stood up and looked out at her, and I thought, this is where the story turns. Not on the fury, though the fury was real and justified and necessary. Not on the secret or the attic or the crackers or the dark, but here, on this side of it, on the side where a little girl laughs in a garden and an old woman decides that love, however imperfect, however infuriating, however complicated, is still the only tool worth working with. That is the part I want you to carry with you when you leave this story today, because families are not the clean, uncomplicated things we sometimes pretend they are. They are full of secrets kept for wrong reasons and decisions made in panic and love. Expressed so badly, it looks almost like neglect. The work is not in having a perfect family. The work is in what you do when you find out exactly how imperfect yours is. You find the child in the attic, you bring her downstairs, you sit at the table and you say the hard, true things, and then you make another pot of coffee and you figure out what comes next. That is all any of us can do, and sometimes, not always, but sometimes, it is enough. If this story moved you in any way, if it made you think about the secrets that live in the spaces of your own family, please leave a comment below. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. And wherever you are watching from, your city, your country, your corner of this wide world, tell me in the comments. It means more than you know. Thank you for being here. I will see you in the next one.